And there is why, let me get your rag, Devin. We're doing the oil filter relocation, besides the fact that it helps the oil run cooler. It makes for much easier oil changes.
Should have dumped that oil out.
Today, Devin and I are doing an oil filter relocation and an oil cooler installation on a 2019 Trike. Don, put a little layer of oil on there for me. Put this on, and that's it. That's the end of it. We never have to reach in here again. No more messing around with any messes with the oil filter. And there is why, let me get your rag, Devin. We're doing the oil filter relocation, besides the fact that it helps the oil run cooler. It makes for much easier oil changes.
Should have dumped that oil out.
After the oil filter relocation is done, the first step of the oil cooler relocation on a 2019 Trike is what I'm getting ready to show you with the shift linkage. Previous years didn't have to do this. This year Harley changed some stuff up with the primary, and so this year this is something that needs to be done. And that is this rear shift arm. We've already changed it. The distance between this hole and the case from the factory is 3.5 inches. What we did is we took you see it's 2.5 inches now. And that's because we took the Allen wrench and we loosened right there. We loosened, took that off. It's just like your shift linkage, it's on a spline. We removed that, slid the arm off, put it back one tooth on the spline, and then tighten it back down. And now we're getting ready to put the shift linkage back in. And of course we'll have to change the rotation of the shift arms on the spline up front. But that's all to give more room between here and here for the oil cooler. So we have the oil filter relocation set up. The oil cooler is going to go right in here. And that's what we move this back, so that when you shift forward, there's still room for the oil cooler right here. Now the first step in getting the oil cooler installed is these rubber brackets have to go around this down tube, one below this cross member and one above this cross member. But on the twin cooled bikes, the freewheelers don't have this issue, but on the twin cooled bikes, we have water lines for the radiator. And we need to move these water lines just a little bit away from the down tube so that we can get that in there. So the first step is we pull this guard off. It's very simple. Make sure when you put it back on that you get those pins popped all the way into the rubber grommet so that you don't lose that going down the road. So once you get that off, there are two bolts down here. Oops. One right here and one on the other side.
Right behind these plugs.
Okay, and then there's two bolts up here. So those 4 bolts get removed, and we're going to see that happen right now. Those 4 bolts get removed, and when those 4 bolts are removed, then this line will come out far enough. As it says in the instructions, don't yank on it, don't pull, just gently get it away from the frame, and then you'll see how you're able to get the rubber bracket in there. When we put this back together, you'll see that included in the kit are spacers that go between the frame and here, just to give a little bit of space for those rubber brackets. On one side of the rubber bracket, it's a round hole. On the other side is a captive for a nut. And what you want to do is you want to put the bracket around the down tube in place in such a way that the captive side for the nut is closest to the front cylinder. That way it gives you room to tighten the Allen head fastener from the non-engine side. Okay, so we can see that Devin has the 4 bolts out, and that this is plenty loose enough now that we can get that rubber bracket between the water line and the frame. And actually we got to do 2, one above the cross member, which is actually pretty easy, and the one below is the little bit tighter fit. So now this one is going to go through here. The fat part has to get through, and then that's it. So that spacer goes right in between the frame and the bracket. Now the bottom bolts go on. Being very careful of all the wires that are down there for your water pump. You don't want your water pump to quit working at some point in time. And once that's done, we're going to put the plastic cover back on, making sure it snaps back in good. Yeah. Okay. So that's that. And now it's time to get that oil cooler in place. Since we moved this back to get more room for the cooler in here, which does not have to be done to most models, but the 19 Tri-Glide does require that. since we moved that back, we're going to have to adjust my shift pegs back to where I want them. Since we're going to have to pull these off to put them 1 or 2 splines forward to get this up a little higher and get this down a little lower, we're going to go ahead and pull this off right now, both of these off, to make it easier to work in here. It's not necessary to do that, but since we have to pull them off anyway, might as well. First thing we're going to do is cut 2 pieces of hose longer than needed to go on there, and go ahead and clamp on there, because once we put the oil cooler on right here, it'll be hard to get in there. So we'll get that. We're going to cut them longer than we need them, and then we'll cut them to size once we're ready to connect them. Then after we put that hose on, we'll go ahead and put the oil cooler in right there, and then connect up the rest of the hose. As you can see, we have 2 hoses installed to the puck where the oil filter used to be. One of them is coming back down to the new location of the oil filter. We have not cut it to length yet. The other is shorter, but long enough that we'll be able to hook it up to the oil cooler once it's hooked up. We've already put the rubber brackets on the down tubes, and now we're getting ready to put the frame or the bracket that holds the oil cooler into those brackets. Once we get them in there, get the bolts started loosely. And by the way, you'll note that in the instructions it says you might have to use channel locks to pinch the bracket together, and that's not the case anymore. We're supplying longer bolts so that it's not such a tight fit, and there's no need to use channel locks to pinch those together to get the bolts started. So we'll get the bolt started on there, get it sort of tightened up a little bit, and then once that's snug but still able to be moved, because you'll notice that those holes are slotted also, then we'll put the oil cooler up against the bracket, make sure that the oil cooler is exactly where we want it to be, and then finish snugging those clamps up nice and tight against the on the down tube, and then we'll go ahead and put the oil cooler on there permanently. What you've just seen is we tightened down the brackets around the down tube, and then we put the oil cooler where the tabs of the oil cooler are forward of the bracket. That gives a cleaner look. So on this side you're seeing the bracket instead of the tabs. So what we're going to do now is cut the hose that's going to the cooler from the puck where the oil filter used to be, and go ahead and clamp it up onto the cooler. Important thing to note, a couple things. Number one, this oil cooler is the cooler, it has like at least 50,000 miles on it. I don't remember if I used it on a bike before the 14, but this is the cooler that came off of the 2014. There is no in and out on the oil cooler. So it doesn't matter which nipple you put it on the bottom of the oil cooler. It can go either way. So the way that we have the oil routing, we have it coming out of the engine at its hottest, coming back to the oil filter. So it's going through the oil filter at its hottest. It's getting filtered through the oil filter, cooling down because it's out in the wind. It has that hose, and then from the oil filter it's going to go back to the oil cooler and go through the oil cooler, and then from the oil cooler back into the engine. Hey folks, if you liked this video or you found it useful, please give us a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, well, give us a thumbs down. Please hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. It helps us out a lot. And if you'd like to see each new video as it comes out, hit the notification bell and you'll get notified each time we put out a new video. Also, if you could leave us a comment below telling us what you like, telling us your suggestions or thoughts for new videos, we'd appreciate it.